Okay, the fun never ends here on TNT. I'm joined again by my old chum, John Porter, from the one and only Chasing Descent podcast. John is an ex-cop and also a former university manager and IT pro. That sounds pretty impressive. And as I say, the host of Chasing Descent. Welcome back this morning, and how are you doing this fine Monday morning?
I'm doing well, mate. I'm doing very well indeed. Thank you for having me back on. Yeah, I've been around a long time, I suppose. That's why I've ended up with all these different jobs.
I know, it's funny, isn't it? When I reflect back on my life, my career path, it's taken me to where I am now. It's like a proverbial roller coaster ride with a few loop-the-loops thrown in for good measure. I'm sure you can identify with that yourself, my friend. We've got a few things to talk about here this morning. As we know, there's been a lot of success, a few wins with the farmers' protest. They seem to be spreading. Initially, a few weeks ago, we were talking about Germany. We're talking about France. Now it seems to be Wales, England and Ireland are mobilising as well. The tractors are out in force. What do you think the trajectory is for these protests? And should we see them expect to see France-style levels in Wales, for example?
Well, we'll go into that in a second. First of all, though, I do have to correct Simon. It was Midge Ure that sung in Ultravox, not Bono.
I know. When he said that about Vienna, I thought maybe he did backing vocals on it. You know the way Sting did backing vocals on Money for Nothing with Dire Straits with Mark Knopfler. I was thinking, I actually should have asked him. I said, did he do backing vocals? Because he definitely wasn't the singer of Ultravox.
Yeah. So anyway, let's go into the serious stuff. And you know what?
This is serious. The singer of Ultravox is damn serious. Thank you very much.
Well, it is. I mean, you can't replace a Scotsman with an Irishman.
No, you definitely can't. They both had dodgy ponytails. They both had dodgy ponytails at the time. Though. They give them that.
They do. I'll give you that. Yeah. So the farmer protests. So the farmer protests. I'm very wary of protests because first of all, you have to think, what's the mission? You know, what are these guys out? Who are they out to help? And what's the mission? What's the end game? And ultimately, it always seems to be, when you boil it down, they're out for themselves, right? So the farmers have got concessions in Europe, the German farmers, the French farmers. So Ursula von der Leyen has knocked back some of the things that she was going to put into the Agenda 2030, 2040 thing. So they've removed the emissions linked to farming. They've given them concessions by doing away with the halving pesticide, within the next 6 years. So the farmers have got what they need to do their job, which is make food and earn a living. Now, the people that think the farmers were out there fighting for our freedoms, no, they weren't. They were out looking for themselves. And if you think about all these things, ultimately the people that do it are looking for themselves. Remember the big the lorry protests about the cost of diesel in Europe? It was all about the cost of diesel. They're not looking for anything, for themselves. Look at all the protests that the ones in Britain that we're talking about. What are these farmers protesting about? Because they're not protesting about. They're not going to start protesting about freedoms. They're really protesting about the restrictions that are being placed on them. And the land restrictions and the use of how they can use that land. And then you look at Wales, and Wales is a great example because you think, well, the Welsh are going to get up there, they're going to start fighting for us. Well, the tractor protest was all over social media, guys in tractors saying we're having it. And ultimately I think they had a meeting and a cup of tea in a community hall in Wales, and I've not seen anything since. And then I saw 8 tractors running through, Balfron in Scotland or something like that. 8 tractors, right? Okay, well, maybe they were actually just going somewhere. So what are these guys going to achieve? And then let's look at the really big protests. Let's look at the trucker protest in Canada. What did that achieve? So all those trucks, they brought Canada to a halt. They occupied the centre of the capital city, Ottawa. What did they actually achieve? Well, ultimately, most of these protests seem to end up with everybody doubling down on the dystopia. Because let's go back to the protests that we had in London over the last 4 years. Well-attended protests, but not reported in the media and given a different slant by the media. And what did those protests actually achieve? And if we boil it down, what they actually achieved was more laws and more powers for the police to stop you protesting. And that's quite frightening.
Yeah, there's certainly a case to be made. And I mean, I'll be honest with you, if I was a farmer and I was out protesting, taking time out from doing my job, I would be out because it's affecting me directly. So there's no doubt about it. Of course they're out because it's affecting their livelihoods. It's hitting them in the pocket. But of course, it's going to hit us also in the pocket. If there's a lack of food, it's going to push the prices up. Or if there's no food, it's going to turn into a Hunger Games type scenario. The other aspect of this, by the way, is that any large movement or any large mass protest is liable to be hijacked, at least in part, by agent provocateurs, the government sending people in to whip certain elements up or give the legitimacy of a peaceful, non-violent protest to soil that to a degree. And of course, then to say, like, we can't allow this to happen again, so therefore we need to crack down. So totally take on board what you're saying about when you reflect back on what these protests have done, does it not tighten the vice just a little bit more? But certainly at the point, like if your Chasing Dissent podcast was taken off and Locked and Loaded and TNT was, we would probably be out in the streets of London protesting because we've been hit personally. But then, of course, other people would say, well, yes, but it's also striking a blow at freedom and liberty and so on. And then the government say, well, there's a lot of people gathering down up in Glasgow today or over in Belfast today. Let's get some people in there to stir the pot and get these guys a lot of bad publicity. So I think it's like smoking. There's a lot of smoke and mirrors, John, with everything at the minute. And a lot of people find that, this whole business of critical thinking, you're told to think about everything, question everything. So you shouldn't automatically just take everything at face value. The flip side of that is, I think there's a lot of people discounting everything automatically as well. I think you need to strike that balance in the middle. Say, okay, what's actually happening on the ground? What has been happening on the ground? And what has been the outcome of previous actions in the past? And I think you need to take everything into account and put it in the balance and then come to your own conclusions on it. So it's an interesting take on it for sure. But one thing I will say is, there was as we finish this off, Greenpeace co-founder Dr. Patrick Moore was talking about nitrogen in fertilizers. He said, if we did actually achieve net zero, if we did it, at least 50% of the population would die of hunger and disease. He said at least 50% of the population depends on nitrogen fertilizer for its existence. And there's people trying to ban it. Netherlands, Sri Lanka have already made these kind of moves. So truly, it's a death wish in disguise. So one way or the other.
You're 100% right, because that's what kicked off Indonesia. It was the banning the nitrogen fertilizer because people were actually dying because they were starving to death. Now, that's the kind of protest that works because everybody came out there, not just the farmers. That affected everyone. The whole population came out and they affected, regime change. They changed the government. The Prime Minister had to flee the country. That's when you make a difference. But in our situation, where the media are firmly controlled by the government, I mean, they're in their pocket. So really, until you get the rest of the population with you, you can't make effective change with protests. You just can't do it. And that's a horrible thing to say because you think you've got the freedom of speech, but really, when it comes to it, do you really? Do you really?
Numbers are absolutely crucial. And you mentioned like a small protest somewhere. There was 8 people turned up or 8 tractors that went to a local community hall. That ain't going to make any difference whatsoever. The key is mass in numbers. So the reason why, for example, the Ottawa protest got so much coverage over 2 years ago, can you believe that was 2 years ago, was because of the number of people that were descending on Ottawa and the actual effect that it did have, bringing the place to a standstill. It's the same with the Netherlands last year. It's the same with what's happening in France and Germany. The one encouraging thing about this, I would say, is that, yes, in the first instance, it was the farmers, or in that case, the truckers that were coming out, but then that seemed to suck in a lot of the public behind them as well. And that's where I think numbers are important too. When we need mass non-compliance, not just non-compliance, individual non-compliance is fine for you and I in our everyday lives. But if enough of us get together, it has this weird effect. It kind of sucks more people in, don't you think? Like a vortex of non-compliance. And I think that's what they're afraid of, the numbers rather than the actual causes that they're actually protesting against.
You're 100% right, Rick. But the problem is, when you've got the grasp of the media and you're under your control, you can't get the numbers out to the numbers. You know, you can't. You have a good sized protest. Look at the protests that happened that Natalie was on, that Ben was on. You know, in London, there was millions of people there, and yet, you know, Mariana Spring was reporting that as like, you know, a few 10,000 people, a few hundred. You know? Yeah, exactly. Filming in an alley. You know, actually being caught and seen by people that we know, like Ben. He saw her filming in an alley, away from the main thing, misrepresenting what was going on. And when the media are doing that, the general population of the public think, well, it's only a few people, and really, it's not affecting me, so I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to sit back and see what happens. And unfortunately, that's the situation that affects Britain most. You know, let's just sit back and see what happens.
Does it not also, just as we're wrapping this up, John, does it not also show the importance of what you're doing and what I'm trying to do here and TNT's doing as well? Yeah. If it weren't for alternate sources, independent sources, bringing the actual facts and the coverage of this to the masses, whether they choose to listen to us or not, at least we're providing the service of bringing them the actual truth and showing the real numbers. That's why we collectively are viewed upon as such a threat. And we'll have all these bills and online harms bills and disinformation laws now being passed in Ireland to shut people like you up, because effectively we are doing what the mainstream media should be doing but aren't, because they're paid off. We're bringing people the truth.
Yeah, you're exactly right. We're bringing people the truth, and unfortunately, that's why we're sitting in the middle, and nobody likes us, because, you know, you're telling the people that you know, want all out change, that, you know, you've got to be able to do certain different things to achieve it, and really what you did achieved very little. And then you're telling the other side, you know, that we're trying to report what's actually the groundswell of opinion, and you end up in the middle and nobody likes you.
I know, stuck in the middle, as the old Steelers Wheel song went, you know, stuck in the middle with you. And that's a nice way to round it off. We started off talking about mid-year, now we're talking about Steelers Wheel. Anybody that's seen Reservoir Dogs will know what we're talking about here, but I don't want to get too graphic. It's still a bit early in the morning. John, we've got to take...
We'll keep them on.
Keep your ear to the ground, no pun intended. For more information on that one. John, it's been an absolute blast. We got to take a little break now. That's John Porter. Please follow him and support the guys over at Chasing Dissent. You can check out their YouTube channel. Him and Ben are doing an absolutely sterling job there. John, many thanks as always for joining us. Love the shirt, by the way. Love the background as well. I'm going to have to invest me in some neon pink also, just to get with the program. So big thanks to you this morning, John, and I hope you have a great day doing whatever you're going to do. You're welcome. So please, listeners, don't go away. We shall be right back after.